Folks, if you're just joining us, we're speaking with Gabriel Wilensky this afternoon. His book, 6 Million Crucifixions, available at www.brenthollandshow.com. Just click on the book cover once you're there. It'll take you right to a place online where you can pick it up from the comfort of your own home. The book is called 6 Million Crucifixions, Gabriel. Why did you name it 6 Million Crucifixions?
Well, the story behind the title is interesting because I came up with the idea of the title thinking of the crucifixion as a central aspect of Christianity and how Christianity turned against Jews and Judaism as a central aspect of its self-identity. The 6 million number, of course, is representative of the number of Jews that were murdered during the Holocaust by mostly Christian people. But the interesting aspect about the title, too, was that after thinking the title, I looked to see if the title had already been used by someone else for something else. And lo and behold, what I found was that it wasn't used, but it had been said by Pope John the 23rd in reference to the Holocaust that it was 6 million crucifixions. So a great idea to use the title, given the fact that the Pope had also used it in reference to the Holocaust.
Right. I just want to start off, I want to read something from the book. The Catholic Church considered the Jews pestilent for 1,500 years, put them into ghettos, etc., because it recognized the Jews for what they were. I am moving back toward the time in which a 1,500-year-long tradition was implemented. I recognize the representatives of this race as a pestilent for the state and for the church. And perhaps I am thereby doing Christianity a great service for pushing them out of schools and public functions. You want to know who that quote was by, folks? Adolf Hitler. Oh yeah, let's go there right away. Building up just prior to the Holocaust, what was the sentiment like not only in Germany, but around the world towards Jews in general?
The feeling was of animosity and contempt. Jews had been persecuted in Christian lands for centuries prior to the Second World War. When Hitler came to power, as a matter of fact, when Hitler was even born, the feeling of hatred toward Jews was very, very deep and very entrenched in German society, as well as in the societies of other countries in Europe. Even in the Americas, that was true as well, although to a lesser extent. So when Hitler came into the scene after World War I and he became a politician, he found fertile soil. Found that the population in Germany, in Munich where he was operating, already hated Jews. And he felt that this was a tool that he could use to move the people toward a particular goal, because they shared this common hatred.
Now, one of the things, by the way, folks, we're speaking with Gabriel Wilensky today. His book is called 6 Million Crucifixions. Easy way to get it, as always, www.brenthollandshow.com, www.brenthollandshow.com. That'll give you a link. Just click on the book cover. We'll take you right to a place where you can get it online. We're trying to push the envelope today on the Brent Holland Show with Skype, as you can tell. I'm hoping that this is going to work. One of the things that the Catholic Church in specific did was they signed an agreement with the Nazis, with Germany. And that was the first international recognition, if you will, of the Third Reich, the Nazis. Why in the hell would the church do something as stupid as that? Because prior to that, as is written in the book, they forbade Christians in Germany, Catholics in Germany, to be part of the Third Reich. They forbade them not to be able to join the party. Why in the hell would they turn that around and all of a sudden give Hitler this international recognition? It's crazy.
Well, it is crazy in retrospect, but you also have to keep in mind the realpolitik of the time. The Vatican, of course, as the state representing the Catholic Church, had the Catholic Church as its primary goal, to protect the Catholic Church as its primary goal. And therefore, it felt that it had to protect the interests of the church in Germany, which were considerable in the early 20s and 30s. So in order to protect the interests of the church did what it always did, which was signing treaties with potential powers, with other governments. So when Hitler took power in 1933, the Vatican signed this agreement with it because that was the way that the Vatican had traditionally ensured the protection of the interests of the church in the particular country. And that's exactly what their goal was. Germany was mostly Protestant, but they had a very, very big Catholic minority. They were almost 45% of the population. And the church had many interests there, not only economic, but also from a religious perspective. They had all sorts of convents and schools and youth organizations and all kinds of, they were entrenched in all kinds of different ways. And in order to protect this, they had to have this treaty, this concordat. And that's the reason why they signed it. As a side effect of it, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say they feared communism much more, the church that is, much more than Nazi Germany. It just perplexes the mind because let's talk about the Nuremberg laws, for example. The Nuremberg laws were already in place when they signed this. Can we?
No, it was a little bit before. The Nuremberg laws were promulgated in 1935, and the Concordat was signed in 1933.
Oh, I apologize then. Okay. Can we talk a little bit about the Nuremberg laws and the lack of outcry from the Christian churches? Yes,
it was quite a sad part of the period. The Nuremberg laws were the racial anti-Jewish laws promulgated by the Nazis in 1935, and they were intended to disenfranchise the Jews from German society. They basically prevented Jews from holding office, from being teachers in universities or schools, from being doctors, lawyers, in other words, from practicing their professions, and they even deprived them of their citizenship. In other words, they deprived the Jews from their livelihood, which was the first step before depriving them of their lives, which happened later. So in terms of the reaction of the church didn't protest about it. On the other hand, the German Catholic Church in particular, but also the Protestant Church, collaborated with the Germans. They were in collusion with them in the sense of providing the Germans with the means to identify who was a Jew. And they did this by providing the Nazis with baptismal records from their churches, which, if you keep in mind that in Germany, as opposed to East Europe, Poland and Ukraine and other places where the Jews actually wore different garments and they behaved differently, they wore long beards and so on. In Germany, that was not the case at all. German Jews were completely assimilated for the most part. They dressed and spoke like anybody else. And therefore, for the German authorities, it was very hard to identify who was a Jew. And they went to the church for help to do this. And the church provided the baptismal records, which identified who was a Christian, and by definition, an opposition who was a Jew.
It's unbelievable.
And that's
I was going to say, it reminds me so much of what took place 2 years ago in Iran, the uprising in Iran, because of the political situation there. In particular, the vote that took place and people voted and the person didn't get in. What happened was Nokia was supplying the Iranian regime with all the people that were using Nokia cell phones to take pictures and get the word out through Nokia cell phones. It's the same damn thing over and over and over again. We have talked about primarily the Christian church. I'm just going to tell people who we're speaking with right now. By the way, folks, this is an incredible book. We've got to understand what the roots of anti-Semitism are, what the roots of the Holocaust were, in order that it never happens again. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes because I actually think it is happening again on a global scale. Once again, I think we're right on the precipice of something like this catastrophe happening again. The book is called 6 Million Crucifixions. Our guest today, Mr. Gabriel Wilensky. Easy way to get it as always, www.gabriel www.brenthollandshow.com. Just click on the book cover. We'll take you right to a place online where you can order it from the comfort of your own home. Superbly written book, superbly researched. I can't say enough about it. Now, we have primarily talked only about the Catholic Church. What was the Church of England doing, for example, and what were the Protestant churches doing at the same time?
All right, so let's break that into two, because they were two very different behaviors. So the Anglican Church in England were against what was happening to the Jews in Germany. As a matter of fact, the Archbishop leading the Anglican Church in England issued statements very strongly protesting the extermination of the Jews. This was a little bit later as the extermination happened after 1941. And he used very direct, very clear language condemning the extermination of the Jews. Now, the Protestant churches in Germany were not like this. Unfortunately, they did exactly the opposite. They did not necessarily openly promote the execution of the Jews, but they certainly cleansed the souls of the murderers, if you will. When people came back from the front and when they talked to members of the churches, they got succor from the church clergy. And also from a purely organizational point of view, the Protestant churches actually spoke in favor of Hitler and of his policies, and they urged the faithful to obey Hitler and to do his bidding and fight for him and his wars.
All this stems from a misperception, an abomination, I'll call it, that stems from the crucifixion of Christ 2,000 years ago, where the Jews have been blamed for the death of Christ, and therefore they killed God, and I'm paraphrasing the Gospels right now, but essentially it says they're going to be condemned for all time because of this. This is pure rubbish. This wasn't the message at all, and yet it had got bastardized and perverted by the church elders. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. It's quite unfortunate that the animosity began at the very, very beginning, even at the time shortly after Jesus' death, when the Gospels were written, about 30 years and on after his death. These documents were written with an agenda, and it was an agenda of religious teaching, but it also was a political agenda, because you have to keep in mind that the early Christians, who began as a sect within Judaism, wanted to distance themselves from Jews who did not recognize Jesus as the Messiah. You also have to keep in mind that in the year 66 all the way through the year 70 of the Common Era, the anti-Semitism of the early Christian sect was actually incremented by the fact that the Roman Empire had fought a war with the Jews, and therefore they felt very, very negatively about Jews and Judaism. So this early sect was doing everything that they could to distance themselves from Jews. The New Testament, Gospels, the Acts of Apostles, and other books speak very negatively about Jews. In those books, in the Gospels and the Acts of Apostles, there are about 450 anti-Semitic verses, which amount to an average of 2 per page. It's next to impossible for somebody to read this every week and not get some sense of animosity and contempt for Jews.
There was also the rhetoric that had stemmed from there, and it just seemed to be building on and building on. It was almost an inevitability that something like the Holocaust would take place. This is one of the roots of the Holocaust, folks. This darn rhetoric that I as a Christian, have also, I won't say partaken in, but have been taught that the Jews indeed were the fault for murdering Christ, and nothing could be further from the truth. It is absolutely an abomination and a perversion of what the Gospels truly meant, which is love everybody. And that's the bottom line here, folks. The book is called 6 Million Crucifixions. Our guest today, Gabriel Wilensky. And we're talking about the roots of anti-Semitism and the roots of the Holocaust today. And both the Catholic Church and all the churches implicity in that. Now, there's a wonderful chapter in here, Gabriel, where you line out methodically the legal aspects of how indeed the Catholic Church and the other churches were implemented in the Holocaust. Could we describe some of those to their listeners right now?
Yes, absolutely. Let me start by saying that it's the my premise in the book that there were many crimes committed by members of the clergy before, during, and after the war, and these crimes were never really brought up. There was a trial against the hierarchy of the Nazi Party in Nuremberg, but no member of the clergy was ever put on the dock. And so I actually speak about these crimes in the book, and I make the point that after the war, the Allies should have set up another trial to put the members of the clergy who were guilty of crimes on the dock, just like they were planning to do to the industrialists, and how they did it with the hierarchy of the Nazi Party. Now, in terms of which crimes were committed, there were several different kinds of crimes, but mostly they were of the type of the clergy, like as I was saying, being collaborators or being accomplices, if you will, to the Nazi regime. Like I was describing earlier, in the 1930s, they provided the German authorities with the baptismal records. So this is providing material assistance in the persecution of a particular ethnic group. So that is a crime. But they also did other things. They were guilty of incitement. They were guilty of incitement for hundreds and hundreds of years. Of course, you cannot put somebody on the dock for what their predecessors had done, but even members of the clergy, both Catholic and Protestant, during the war, actually prior to the war and during the war, they were inciting the faithful to hate Jews. They were continuing to preach the typical traditional Christian anti-Semitism that led to the mindset that eventually made people murderers. So they incited the faithful, and they were guilty of crimes of omission too. They did not tell the faithful that it was a crime or a mortal sin to murder people. That they never actually told the faithful to refrain from doing that. Neither the Pope nor the bishops nor anyone else ever actually told the faithful to refrain from doing this. So this is a crime of omission. But also, even after the war, there were members of the Vatican. Yes, exactly. They actually helped. They helped the Nazis and the Ustasha, who was the regime in Croatia, escape Europe, to escape justice, which is mind-boggling. And but they did do this, and they actually provided shelter, food, and clothing to these wanted war criminals that the Allies were searching everywhere in Europe. They provided assistance to them. They hid them in Vatican properties, and then they gave them passage to Genoa, where they went on a ship to typically South America, mostly Argentina, but other places as well. And some ended up in Canada, some in the US, some in Britain, some in Australia. But they were actually helped by the Vatican, and the Vatican, of course, had, Vatican is a state, and therefore they had a full diplomatic corps. And through this diplomatic corps, they asked for help to various different Catholic countries to provide shelter to these Nazis, and they did. That's exactly it. And they got visas to all these various different countries, thanks in great part to the Vatican, who incidentally was also at the time printing false identity cards using the Red Cross documents to change the identity of these wanted men.
Unbelievable. It's just unbelievable when you read
it. It is unbelievable, but ostensibly the rationale for this changed. There was one bishop in the Vatican called Bishop Hudal, and he was a very pro-Nazi, openly pro-Nazi, and he believed that the Nazis were really not that bad, and what they had done to the Jews was not so bad, and it was a thing of Christian charity to help them, and that they had suffered enough, and it was time to move on and help them. That was his position, and he actually helped many Nazis, including very notorious ones, like Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, to escape Europe. Even though Eichmann himself was not Catholic, but he later was so thankful to the Catholic Church that he became an honorary member of the Catholic Church, but he was Protestant, actually.
was Protestant. You mentioned the Nazis escaping to Canada before, and as you know, this show is broadcast across Canada. I just want to point out this book for you, folks. None is too many. That was essentially the government's mantra when Jews were trying to escape to a safe haven across the sea and come to Canada. They didn't want to let anybody in, yet we let the Nazi perpetrators in. This is another good book you may want to look at as well. But our guest today has written a terrific book as well. His name is Gabriel Wilensky. It's called 6 Million Crucifixions. Easy way to get it, as always, www.brenthollandshow.com. Just click on the book cover. We'll take you to a place where you can pick it up. Not all the perpetrators involved in this, I shouldn't say it that way, not every clergy member was guilty of these crimes. Indeed, there are many, and very well written and very well pointed out in the book as well, folks, many clergy members helped save Jews. Can you tell us one of those stories?
Yes, absolutely. There were several, and all of them have to be commended for it because they were very good. One in particular, that I admire very much, he was a great man, was Angelo Roncalli, who was the delegate of the Vatican in Turkey at the time, and he was in Istanbul, and he later became Pope John the 23rd. And he fought tirelessly to save Jews during the war. He got them fake baptismal records in the Balkans, from Bulgaria and other places, and he helped many Jews actually escape. So he needs to be commended for that. And after the war, he worked tirelessly to remove things like the term perfidious Jews, veiled hearts, and expressions of that nature from Catholic liturgy. And he got it. Like the perfidious Jews expression comes from the Good Friday prayer, and he got it out of that. And then later he convened the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, which, among other things, was instrumental in issuing a declaration called Nostra Aetate, which exonerated Jews from Jesus' time and of all time from killing Jesus. And so that was a very, very important man. But he was not the only one. There were other members of the clergy who helped Jews. There was a bishop in France called Bishop Saliège, and he actually made a sermon. He wrote a pastoral letter, and he read it from the pulpits in his diocese in France, and he spoke very openly, very clearly against the persecution of the Jews. He said that it was the wrong thing to do, that Jews were human beings too, and that it was the Christian thing to do, to help them, not to persecute them. And there were others as well.
I want to bring the arc right around and complete it, and let's bring it up to modern day 2010. You've pretty much told us a very, very good, you've painted a very accurate picture of the anti-Semitism that was going on back then, just prior to the Holocaust. Do you feel the same thing's going on right now globally, with all the condemnation against Israel, people shooting off their mouths, they don't even know the issues?
Yes, I don't think it's the same thing. I think anti-Semitism is still around us, but it's a different type of anti-Semitism. I think anti-Semitism actually had three basic stages. The first phase was the theological anti-Semitism that I describe at length in the book, that comes from Christian teachings. That transformed itself after the Enlightenment, and then particularly during the 19th century, transformed itself into something new, something secular, and then something racial. This is, of course, what the Germans and the Nazis took as the basis for their hatred of the Jews. So that was the second phase. The third phase is more modern, and it is a political phase. And we see this thing manifesting as anti-Zionism or anti-Israelism. And so it's a new form, but it's a politically correct form. This is not to say that criticizing Israel is a sign of anti-Semitism. It's perfectly legitimate to criticize Israel, just like it is legitimate to criticize any other country. However, the way Israel is being criticized and the type of criticism that is being thrown at Israel today, in many ways, is just basically a very lightly veiled form of anti-Semitism.
Precisely.
It is done this way because it is a politically correct form of doing it. In polite circles, nobody wants to be an anti-Semite like the Germans were doing in the 1930s and 40s, because it would not be received very well at all. However, to criticize Israel is perfectly legitimate, and it is actually something acceptable in polite society. And that's why we're seeing that today.
And yet we never hear any talk about Hamas. And how do you make peace with Hamas, whose pure doctrine is to, just like the Nazis, annihilate all the Jews in the Middle East? It's impossible. You can't do that. How do you make peace with the Nazis? Anyways, the book is called 6 Million Crucifixions, folks. Our guest today, Gabriel Wilensky. I urge you all to get this book. Is it an important document so that this type of thing never happens again? It explains very clearly the roots of where all this anti-Semitism came from, and it explains very clearly where the church was implemented, and what's very positive is he finishes the book off very, very well with those who helped out. And that's what I want to get across today. There's always hope for everybody. Mr. Wilensky, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon, but I'm going to ask you a question I virtually ask everybody who comes on this show. This show is broadcast from coast to coast to coast. We have 3 coasts in Canada, way up north in the Arctic.
Sure.
You are virtually speaking to every university student in Canada right now, and international students as well, as it's broadcast on the internet. What would you say to them?
Well, what I would say to them is that I hope that they are intrigued enough to go and learn about this topic. I think that the university students, which by definition are a younger generation, probably ignore some of this background material. Most young people who were born after the Second Vatican Council in 1965 do not have a first-hand experience on this hatred. They probably never heard from their priests negative things about Jews. They never heard the anti-Semitism that their predecessors had heard. So I think it's very important for the younger generation of Christians to learn about this background, to learn about this history, because they probably have not experienced it firsthand. So I hope that my book and this conversation that we're having today entices them and intrigues them enough to go and learn about this background, because it's important to know history, what happened in the past, in order to prevent the same things from happening in the future.
Precisely. Very well put, my friend. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time out this afternoon to join us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Shalom, my friend.
All right. Goodbye.